Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 2006 and we're going to be taking a look at James Gang and they're going to be performing Funk 49. Let's get the guys up on screen and see how they get on. I'm just going to jump in here during this percussive breakdown. As always, the link to this video is going to be in the description below, so you guys can watch it the whole way through without me interrupting it. But looking at Joe Walsh, his guitar technique and the way that he plays with so much groove and feel in there, the most important thing, especially with this track and the riff, is the strumming that's going on the whole time, that muted strumming that gives it that sound, that funky groove that you get into straight away off the bat, and the little intro lead where we've got a little bit of hybrid picking going on there from Joe. He's one of those guys that has everything, and that's why he's worked with so many different artists and bands and is always in demand, because he's got that ability to not only play great rhythm, great feel, play great lead guitar, but also provide a lead vocal that is standalone, that you would be happy with just having a lead vocalist who could sound like that and didn't play any other instrument because it was so strong as a lead vocal. So Joe is one of those rare talents that has the ability to do so many things at the top level, but also here, surrounded by a top band, great backing vocalists as well, and the fact that the band can add in all of these percussive elements, sometimes, especially with backing vocalists, they can provide some great backing vocals, but then they might pick up a tambourine or a cowbell, and it won't really add anything to the performance. But with this, we get a great example of backing singers coming in with percussive elements such as a cowbell or two that are going to add to the performance and to the overall sound. People often mention about Joe being a clean guitarist in the way that he plays, but this is a great example of Joe playing cleanly whilst playing with seemingly a messy technique. If you don't play the guitar, there is so much that you're going to miss out on here because of Joe's technique, the way that he throws in all of the rhythm work but the riffs as well with a strumming technique on the right hand, which is so difficult to do, to get all of those notes really clean and concise whilst playing a rhythm motion with the right hand. And to demonstrate what Joe's doing here, to give you an idea, if you don't play the guitar, I'm just going to pick up my Strat and give a quick demonstration. As you can tell, I've gone full screen for this so you guys can see my left hand. hand. Unfortunately, I haven't got the ability to put everything into the computer at once, so hopefully you'll be able to hear the amp in the background. But getting into Joe's rhythm, his technique, and the amount of strumming that he's got going on with the right hand, and muting at the same time in order to get the riff to pop out. So in the intro, we've got the riff. That kind of thing, where the riff is mostly strums and going all the time. If I did it without the muting, we'd have... It would just sound messy and rubbish because the funk and the groove in this composition and in the riff is all in those muted strums, having this... Keeping all of those other strings quiet and getting that riff just to pop out is so difficult, but Joe's the kind of guy that makes it look so easy, even though there's loads of technique going on in order to achieve the riff and the groove of all of those muted strums at the same time. The other thing that Joe does is keep this exact same technique for his riffs. So it means that the riffs have an aggressive percussive quality to them because of that right hand hitting these muted strings. So the riff that we've got, this... all of those strums in between, I'm going to slow that down just to show you what I mean. Going... You can see already that right hand. I'm moving it up and down the whole time. And it means that you get all of those percussive strikes in the riff. And it just makes it stand out, makes it sound more aggressive. The great thing about this is if you have the technique to be able to mute those strings and just get a riff, it means that then you can move it anywhere. So what we have here is then a tone higher. Just as a comparison, I'm going to play the riff without all of those muted strums in there so you can hear what that sounds like compared to all of the muted strums that Joe puts in there and just see how it differs. So you can hear that it's just lost. Everything, all the expression that's in there, when you start applying those muted strums and playing the riff, you can start to lean into it and put that groove in there with the strumming. And you can start to inject that feel into the riff. If you haven't worked on your technique sufficiently, you might sound like this. Because you're hitting all the strings, you have to mute every string apart from the one you want, and the riff is crossing 3 strings. So, like I said, so much technique in there, and it will fly under the radar if you don't play the guitar, but if you do, you'll know what I'm talking about, how Joe can keep his guitar so clean whilst being seemingly messy with the right hand strumming. The other thing is his vocal, which is aggressive in nature as well. He's got that rasp in there, that vocal distortion to match everything. So the guitar matches the vocal. You just get the full package with Joe. Another thing you'll notice about Joe's playing, and you would have seen it when I was playing the riff, is having that thumb over the top of the guitar so that you've got your root note being played with a thumb, especially when playing riffs. It just gives you that get out of jail free card of throwing in a root note in order just to fill in a little bit of that space if there is any within the riff. Again, it's something that if you're not used to throwing it in there, it is good to have the ability to play standard bar chords and have the thumb in that classical position behind the guitar neck to get stretches in for your lead work, but then having that thumb coming over the top of the guitar means you can start to blend lead and rhythm together, which is exactly what we've got here with the song and the riff. It's just those two combinations of rhythm and lead. The other thing about this performance is that it's totally live and the microphones are so dry. There isn't a great deal of effect on the microphone that Joe's got or the backing vocalist. It's just straight up live entertainment from a great band. But let's get back into the performance. And there we have it. But there is so much technique in there as well when you just throw in those harmonics. It's something that is so comfortable for Joe to do live. He can just go where he wants with that rhythm, with the lead work, with the fills as well. And notice how when he starts singing in the verses, he just brings down that guitar playing so low so that the vocal is now the focus, and then when it comes back into a riff or the rhythm that he wants us to pop out, he really does lean into the playing more. And this is what top players do. They know exactly how to work with their instrument. If they've got a couple of instruments that are vocal cords and a guitar, you just want one of those shining at any one time. This is one of those performances that is a great overall mix. And if you do have a sub, turn that up to 11 because we've got Dale Peters here on bass, really laying it down. And it's so solid with Jimmy Fox, who has his failed musician t-shirt on. But it all starts with the rhythm section, like I always say. So those two guys are locked in, which gives the foundation for the rest of the band. Also to the left of the stage, we've got Bill Appleberry, and he's providing a lot of cowbell in the verses and throughout the intro, but then also gets into the percussive elements on the breakdown. He plays keys as well. But giving a shout out to the backing vocalist, because we have Stacey Michelle, who is providing that tambourine, which gives such a lift to that sound. Again, a lot of emphasis placed on the backing vocalists, not only to back Joe up with those great harmony vocals in the background, but having these percussive elements just moving it along the whole time. We've also got Gia Chiambetti and Robin Kermsey, who are the other two backing vocalists to make that trio complete. And apologies if the pronunciations of those names isn't quite right. Just to give a quick bit of background on Joe, because he was one of those guys that did start playing at a young age. He was 10 when he got his first guitar, and he was inspired by the success of the Beatles. Not that the Beatles were a great deal older than him, probably only about 5 years in it, but he would have witnessed the success they had coming over from the UK, part of that British invasion. And in the mid-60s, 1965 to 1967, is when Joe played with the Measles, and it wasn't until 1968 that the three-piece setup started with him opening for Cream at a gig. It was meant to be Ronnie Silverman that would be part of the four-piece, but he didn't turn up for that gig, and the guys really needed the money, so they decided to go ahead anyway as a three-piece. and they found out that actually they made a decent sound as a three-piece, so then they continued in that format. Just to mention that James Gang did start in 1966, Joe came along a little bit later. Initially, Phil Gialombardo provided vocals and keys, and they had a few changes in the guitar position at that time. But when Joe got involved in the late 60s, they did these shows as a three-piece, and in 1969 they got a manager and they signed with ABC Records. So that same year they released Your Album, and this is when Tom Criss left the band and Dale Peters joined. Dale, who's in this video that we've just watched. And Joe also sold his Les Paul in 1969 to Jimmy Page. He also opened with James Gang for The Who, and The Who were so impressed with the guys that they invited them to join them on their European tour. And this is also when Pete Townshend gave a compliment to Joe, saying that he really liked his playing, and this blew Joe's mind because he was such a fan of Pete Townshend. So he was really flattered, and it just goes to show again how modest Joe is as a player, that somebody that he admires gives him a compliment and he thinks that he's nowhere near as good as Pete Townshend said, but he definitely is. So they released James Gang Rides Again in 1970, and that was a top 20 album, and it went gold. They then released Thirds in 1971, and that was another gold album. So two very popular albums back to back. In 1971 is when Joe left the band because of his perceived limitations within the band and what they could do. So from 1973 onwards, he started pursuing his own sound as a solo artist, and also with Barnstorm. And then from 1975 to 1980 is when he had his period with the Eagles, and then he would return with them in 1993. But everybody will know Joe certainly from then, if not from before. The James Gang guys getting together for this, and they didn't do a hell of a lot. This is one of those things that I think Howard Stern wanted to get these guys back together, so as soon as they got on his show, which is what we're watching here. But thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!